So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon or good morning or whatever it is where you are. Today we will talk about climate change, which is the change in climate that directly or indirectly is related to human activity and not related to climate transformation that has natural causes. Although not a visible threat, it has significant social and political and economic ramifications. Climate crisis related to climate change is seriously harming public health, widening health and social inequalities, indirectly affecting security as well, as it is known that the environment is one of the most important social determinants of health. In order to help build a more sustainable Europe and help EU to become a climate neutral by 2050, the European Commission launched an initiative called Climate Pact as part of the European Green Deal.
I don't know. I've been trying to get you.
Can you please switch off your phones? Thank you. The European Climate Pact brings individuals, communities, and organizations together to fight climate change and adapt to its consequences. The Climate Pact Ambassadors is a movement of people united by a shared mission to help save the environment. As part of the pact, each of us can help to build a more sustainable future. Alice Korovesi is a social impact entrepreneur, managing director of the non-profit organization called INZEB, and coordinator of the EU Climate Pact for Greece. Tonight, she will outline the role and work of the EU Climate Pact ambassadors in Greece. Debbie Wagner is a Seattle airport neighbor and a community activist who worked against the expansion of Seattle TAC Airport. Since 1993, she has helped co-found the National Aviation Watch organization, networked with other groups through the world, gathered data, worked as an elected official to push for better environmental control, led a grassroots organization. She also wrote the book Over My Head, a memoir of 17 years doing airport environmental justice work. She has been a community leader in environmental and climate justice and even sued the FAA in America. For almost 30 years, she is fighting against one of the most pollutant and health damaging industries of the world, which causes serious damage to the environment and increases the consequences of climate change. Tonight, she will talk to us about the situation in USA. Our chair, Mr. John Stewart, will liaise the discussion which will follow and the questions that may arise. So, dear John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eleftheria, and apologies for being a bit noisy earlier on. Somebody rang me trying to get in and I forgot to go on mute. So apologies. Yes, as you said, there'll be plenty of time for discussions and questions later on, but delighted to have you, Alice. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Eleftheria, for the invitation. It's a pleasure being here today. As Eleftheria said, I'm the EU Climate Pact country coordinator for Greece. I'm not an aviation expert. Mainly, I will present you the vision, mission, and objectives of the EU Climate Pact. In addition to, and I will try to connect the Climate Pact and the climate in general with some of the aviation impacts.
Could everybody, sorry, Alice, just make sure everyone who's, if you're unmuted, can you make sure you have no sound in the background because we're hearing something. Sorry, Alice, on you go.
It's okay. Okay, let me share my presentation and let me know if you can see the presentation now.
Yes, we can see it well. We're admiring the plane, Alice.
Yes, it's the plane. I want to make sure that you can see the plane.
Yes.
So climate and aviation. Let's delve a little bit about what Climate Pact is. The EU Climate Pact, it's an initiative. It's an initiative, a European Union initiative that aims to mobilize individuals, citizens, communities, organizations, in order to take active role in climate action in order to foster a united effort towards building a greener Europe. Actually, the EU Climate Pact came out from the vision that European Union has to make Europe carbon neutral by 2050. This is something that was announced in 2019, December 2019, when the EU Green Deal was launched. And European Union and the organizations that are in the European Union, they wanted to find ways in order to mobilize people to take climate action and to have everyone on the road to climate neutrality by 2050. So the objectives of the EU Climate Pact is to seek ways to engage citizens, to engage stakeholders, and promote information about climate, the climate impacts, climate crisis, and foster collaboration, but also to drive tangible climate actions that can contribute to a sustainable development. Currently, we have approximately 900 Climate Pact ambassadors that there are across the 27 member states of the European Union. In Greece, we have 55 Climate Pact ambassadors. Among them is also Eleftheria and Theodzi, that they are promoting through their communities, their networks, and they're mobilizing people and citizens to take climate actions. The main components of the EU Climate Pact is first citizen engagement. So through various actions, it can be a talk, it can be a climate talk, it can be a presentation, it can be workshops with students, it can be anything. They're trying to encourage individuals, citizens, to take their personal actions, to commit in reducing carbon footprints. And this way, they're trying to foster a culture of environmental responsibility. EU Climate Pact actually offers a collaborative platform and establishes spaces for collaboration among local authorities, businesses, civil society organizations, citizens, schools, academia, to develop and implement climate solutions collectively. And of course, it's a platform for knowledge sharing, because through the actions and through the activities that the ambassadors, the Climate Pact partners, but also citizens that they are engaged in a way with Climate Pact, they are disseminating best practices, they are disseminating success stories, and of course, there is a dissemination of scientific data to educate and inspire further climate action across different sectors. The impact and the success stories, those include community projects. Through our actions as EU Climate Pact, we're showcasing successful community-driven projects that have positively impacted local environments, demonstrating the power of collective action. Some examples, there are activities that they are taking place in schools. So pupils, they are learning about climate, they are learning about climate crisis and climate change. So they are trying to do their best within their small communities and their families. And on the other hand, we have, let's say, examples like climate walks. We are going to specific areas. We are discussing about biodiversity, the local initiatives that they are taking place. And all of these community projects, they are taking place and they are actually multiplied in other regions, because people want to find ways to find out more about their community and about the space that they are working and living. Business involvement. We are highlighting examples of business that have adapted sustainable practices, and they have contributed significantly to the goals of the EU Climate Pact. And through their activities, they are trying also to contribute to the overall and overarching goal that the EU has, and this is climate neutrality by 2050. And of course, we have also policy integration, because through our activities, we're trying to explain how the EU Climate Pact and EU in general aligns with the broader EU policies. And definitely we are informing people about the European Green Deal, not only the European Green Deal, but also other legislation and policies that there are in place. And this way we ensure a coherent and comprehensive approach to climate action. In my next slide, I will try to connect the climate change, and climate crisis, if I can say so, with aviation impacts through a research that I have conducted. And again, I'm not an aviation expert, but there are a lot of data available. Aviation carbon footprint plays a significant role in climate change because it contributes approximately to 2 to 3% of global CO2 emissions. And these emissions are expected to rise with increasing air traffic, but also we have the non-CO2 effects because aviation emits water vapor, contrails, and nitrogen oxides, which amplify climate effects through radiative forcing and further exacerbate global warming. We have the radiative forcing, the combined effects of CO2 and non-CO2 emissions from aviation. Those significantly increases the overall climate impact. And this is actually something that it's a ring a bell about necessitating the urgent mitigation strategies. We have sustainable aviation fuels. They are in place, and this is something that can be considered from the aviation companies. And those fuels, compared to conventional jet fuels, can reduce the aviation carbon footprint by up to 80%, which is very critical in decarbonizing the sector. And definitely, this can contribute to the overall vision that Europe has about carbon neutrality by 2050. On the other hand, we have technological innovations. There are advances in aircraft technology, more fuel-efficient engines, lightweight materials that are pivotal in global effort to reduce aviation emissions. Policy and regulation, this is also critical, and I'm sure that your organization is working towards this direction. We have EU policies, including aviation in the EU emission trading system, and the upcoming carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation that aim to reduce aviation emissions. Another proposal is the offsetting and mitigation strategies. There is the opportunity to implement carbon offsetting programs and other strategies to mitigate the environmental impact of air travel. And of course, last but not least, the consumer awareness and choices. We can raise consumer awareness about the environmental impact of their travel choices and to promote the use of greener alternatives. Direct flights, supporting airlines committed to sustainability, and definitely these are messages that Climate Pact ambassadors can deliver and discuss with citizens, because yes, this again can be considered a local action or individual action. And apart from Eleftheria that is working on this field, I mean, in the aviation, I'm sure that we can discuss with other ambassadors as well, not only in Greece, but also to raise this issue to ambassadors across Europe, that aviation is another topic that needs to be discussed with citizens, because citizens need to be aware about the impacts of aviation, but also they need to be aware and to do very informative choices when they are traveling in order to minimize in the way that we can the impacts of aviation. And here I have finished my short presentation, and I'm here to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Alice, thank you very much indeed for that. That was really interesting to find out what's happening. I think we'll go straight on to Debbie, and then we'll do questions for both Alice and Debbie and general discussion after Debbie's presentation. So, Debbie, welcome once again, and it's all over to you. You need to unmute yourself, of course.
Yes, hi. Hello, everybody. I was doing a quick shuffling here, so let me get back to the beginning. Okay. So let's see here. All right, can you see it?
That's good, Debbie. Yes, that's very good.
Yeah, so because of my history in working on emissions in the region around Seattle and SeaTac Airport, I was invited to be a participant on a task force to look at ways to reduce aviation climate impact at 2 airports in our county. So the 2 airports are Boeing Field, or King County International, and SeaTac Airport, which combined are a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in the county. This was kind of been discovered. It's sort of accidentally they fell into looking at different ways to measure CO2 from aviation and realized that it's a gigantic impact in the county. I chose this particular graph here because the aviation emissions that are unaccounted for as far as greenhouse gas between the date of 2020 and 2040 is 7.8 billion tons globally. So when you hear aviation emissions talked about in this sense, that it's usually downplayed, and I'm going to talk about why.
Maybe, can I interrupt you for a minute? Can you make it a full screen so we can see better the numbers?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
So here in the green line is where technology and operational efficiencies can reduce CO2. This is ICAO's CO2 standard. That's the expected reduction coming from the standard. Here's other aircraft technologies like some of the things Alice was talking about, airframe changes, maybe lighter weight materials. And then here's the gap of what's not accounted for in all that planning. So it's gigantic. And I'm going to talk more about this. So maybe we can come back to this with questions in a little bit. So the task force was comprised of citizen groups, industry regulators, researchers, county employees, and we worked together for 2 years. So I was part of the citizen voice coming to this. And one of the reasons I was invited to this is because I've stayed connected with issues that started in 2007 with the first ever Washington State greenhouse gas emissions report, which placed SeaTac Airport at 22% of the county total. So the county is a large county. There's a little over 2 million people living in the county. It is the biggest contributing county in the state of Washington as far as greenhouse gas emissions go. So it was interesting to see that the airport is 22%. One airport, not the two of them, because the two of them are a quarter of the county total. And that's considering all cars, trucks, buses, boats, everything. So, and that was comprehensive. I got involved in 2007 with that first ever emissions report, and the airport quickly tried to move to ways to cut greenhouse gas. We had the first commercial flight of Alaska Airlines using wood waste products as a biofuel in 2016 as a result of that. Task force recommendations, of course. What is some of the ways that the task force agreed we could reduce climate impact? Of course, biofuels is first on the list. That's the industry go-to. That was not our task force recommendation. And technology development, hydrogen, electric hybrid, scheduling, pricing, carbon tax. So in this, we had a recommendation as a group, reducing flights and public education. So the public education piece was pretty important to me, and I'm going to talk about why in a minute. So net zero by 2050. I wanted to show you creative ways that airports are talking about net zero. So first of all, they're dividing their greenhouse gas emission inventories into 3 different scopes. Scope 1 is all cars coming to the airport, trucks, buses, taxis. Scope 2 is all airport sources such as heating, cooling, ground support equipment, and so forth. The gates, where they use the auxiliary power units. And scope 3 is where aircraft are. So achieving net zero by 2050 is focusing on scope 1 and 2. So from an industry perspective, scope 1 and 2, limiting the number of cars, trucks, buses, taxis, converting the ground support equipment to electric, electrifying the gates and so forth. They do not talk about aviation. And the reason for that is greenhouse gas emissions are now controlled by ICAO. They give policy recommendations, but they have no enforcement ability. So they can't force the industry to do anything. That's all voluntary on the part of the industry. Another tactic I've seen is to overstate the cars and the ground support equipment inventories, and then use that as a big reduction goal by converting some of that. So it actually looks like they're doing much more than what in reality is happening, because they're overstating the impacts in scope 1 and 2. Okay, and I wanted to show you some of the approaches to calculating greenhouse gas emissions from the airport. These are different methodologies where you could use landing and takeoff cycle only, which is only 10% of the greenhouse gas emissions coming from aviation. That is how the AEDT model, which is a universal model being used to model emissions at airports, is doing it. They're doing it the same way they do other emissions. So all emissions from an airport in the model are calculated for 10% of that, which is what would hit the ground, be ground level. So it's only a very small percentage of the total emissions, because after 3,000 feet, when the aircraft are taking off or coming in, above 3,000 feet, they assume the emissions are mixing with the atmosphere and somehow don't count anymore as a ground level impact. Another way is to use passenger-based, so the number of people just coming from the county that are using aviation. Another is to use all fuels. This is what the task force advocates for, because it's the way that all transportation is calculated. It's by all fuel pumped, not by what's used in a geographic area or used by certain individuals in an area. All fuels pumped, you see, is quite a bit higher than the landing and takeoff. It's quite a bit higher than the passenger-based or even the consumption-based. The county chose to use the passenger-based method to calculate the greenhouse gas from the 2 airports. The task force strongly disagreed with that and said, you must use all fuel because it is a global impact and none of this will be accounted for in any other way. So it's only doing takeoffs from the airport by all fuel pumped. You'll notice that this 6.7 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions is quite large. It's it's above refineries. It's nearly equivalent to coal-fired power plants. And those are all targets of extreme measures to reduce. Some of the task force conclusions are, ICAO is relying on new engine technology. And as we heard on UECNA recently from an engineer who is involved in developing new engine technology for Airbus, that the limit of the apex of improvements that can be made to engines is about at its end for fuel efficiency. And I would also make the point that the fuel has not changed or been modified, and the fuel use, which is at about 95 billion gallons globally right now, is continuing to rise. So no matter what you do, because the aircraft is is so huge in its impact that any little improvements are going to be quickly overtaken by growth in the industry. 82% of all the frequent flyers out of SeaTac Airport are for business. And the vast majority of people living around the airport do not use aviation. So during COVID, only 5% of the flights were found to be essential. So as most climate policy focuses on you and me, the easy targets, were the easy targets for legislation to control CO2. So our cars, our home heating, our food supply, those things are being looked at closely and regulated. Aviation and the fuel is being exempted in most cases. But because the aviation is such a large and fastest growing contributor to global warming, all these other efforts are at risk of being overtaken. So at the airport, they're reducing scope 1 and 2 by 3%, which is again 10% of the airport inventory, while they're increasing scope 3 jets, the elephant in the room, by 3 or 4% per year. So there is no improvement and even a negative impact that affects other sectors. Biofuels are not an answer because, first of all, our task force demanded that they provide to us data on sustainability of various biofuels that they propose, like waste, converting waste, used cooking oils, forest residuals, and food stock. We asked for how is that reduction in the manufacture, extraction, and delivery. So the supply chain is the only place where biofuels will reduce CO2, because there is absolutely no reduction from any biofuel we talked about at the tailpipe. And keep in mind, again, the tailpipe is the elephant in the room. That supply chain, manufacture, and delivery is a very small portion of the total biofuels. So hydrogen-powered electric that we looked at are under consideration and many years into the future. ICAO's goal for reduction are very small and not aggressive. There are options for reducing CO2, like high-speed rail and other things that people can use. Rail is the least climate-intensive use of transportation per passenger mile in the world. But the US is far behind Europe. We have poor connections. Our system is antiquated, and there's not a lot of investment going into rail. So people are unlikely to use it because of the time factor and because flying is cheap. The only reason flying is cheap is because they externalize the impacts to you and I. Our health that is affected by noise and emissions from aviation is never considered in the bottom line on the economic impact of aviation. So I put this in here about what drives growth and expansion. And these are things you can look at. Our FAA, which governs safety in the US, is supposed to be responsible for making sure safety isn't compromised by things like airport congestion. And airport congestion is something that can be real or it can be contrived. So very rarely is airport congestion organic, coming from demand and increased operations. These are things that happen as a result of industry competition, gate allocation, peak hour demand, and lack of demand system management. I'm not going to go into that really thoroughly. So one thing that drove demand at SeaTac was the addition of Delta, making it a hub for their eastern destinations. So Asia destinations. So these are not even people that are coming and contributing to the economic increase in our region. They're people that are passed through, coming from all over the US to get on a final boarding to go to an Asian destination with Delta. And as you will see from the chart, this particular demand increased the greenhouse gas at SeaTac tremendously. Delta brought in a lot of larger aircraft using more fuel for further destinations, and it increased our greenhouse gas emissions by quite a bit. So in 2014, we had about 350,000 annual operations at SeaTac with an inventory of 4.8 million metric tons of CO2 and 487 million approximately gallons of jet fuel being pumped per year. In 2015, this inventory went up to 5.4 with less operations, but again, these were larger aircraft. So you had more fuel being used. And this is from the all fuel pumped. In 2018, you see that jumped by 200 million gallons to 636 million gallons of jet fuel being pumped per year and 6.1 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So in 2019, which was the year we focused on for greenhouse gas emissions at SeaTac, the gallons pumped were 667 million. You can see that greenhouse gas emissions are going up tremendously at the airport. And these are overtaking, like an example would be, you've got 17 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions per day, which is about 14.5 tons per plane. An equivalent is if you go 5 miles in your car, you're producing about 100 pounds. 100 pounds. So these are just gigantic. So of course the task force recommended using all fuel pumped rather than, you know, using the other method, passenger based or landing takeoff cycle. And you can see how these different kind of methodologies compare. So 2019, you have in the passenger base, you have 4 million metric tons of CO2. In the reality of it, for global emissions, you had 6.5 million. So you're missing 200 million metric tons here in this method. So this is a graph on how much the various methods are going to miss the elephant in the room. And then this last chart that I have, I wanted to read this because this is a conclusion. And it says King County will need to decarbonize aviation fuels by 95% and reduce aviation fuel use by 25% by 2050 to be at net zero. These are impossibilities. It's not going to happen with the trajectory we're on. And again, the elephant is the fuel use, and biofuels are not the answer. They're only a very small percentage of the overall fuel use. They expect maybe 10% use in the US in this timeline. And that's about, you know, the goal is 3 billion gallons. You're not even coming anywhere close to the 19 billion gallons of Jet A fuel that's used right now. And keep in mind that that 10% goes down each year because growth in the industry keeps increasing the fuel use year by year. So if you want an honest analysis, you need to find out the gallons, or in your case, liters of fuel being pumped at your airport each year. And the airport will provide you that information, or they at least do here in the US. And it's nowhere near the kind of information you're getting on these various methodologies to report greenhouse gas emissions by the industry. So that's my presentation.
Debbie, thank you. Thank you
There's
very
more
much.
questions, way
Yeah.
more questions than answers.
But thank you very much indeed. Right, we've got a fair bit of time now for questions or discussion or comments. So put up your hand, either your virtual hand or your real hand. And if I don't spot you, because I can't quite see everybody on the screen, just start talking. And as I always say, you know, it's easy for me, it's easy for Debbie, because our native language is English. Alice came very close to her native language being English. It was extremely impressive, but I know some of you might be a little bit nervous of speaking English. Don't worry, we're here, you're amongst friends, and we'll help you out. So who would like to start with either a question or a comment? Yes, Duncan, I think your real hand is up, and then I'll go to Elefthera.
Yes, thank you very much, Debbie. Quite interesting, and I like the critical approach that the committee took. I'm wondering, are you aware of any other similar critical reports by other committees elsewhere?
Well, the best information, like I was telling John when we first started, because I started on this issue real early in 2007. I was invited by the airport to make a presentation on the first ever greenhouse gas emission inventory that was done for Washington State. And it was done by a friend of mine for, you know, who worked in Department of Ecology. And the issue is that it's obscured because the industry isn't honest about their facts. The AEDT model isn't transparent, and all of this data can be separated and manipulated to give people the wrong idea about what's happening. Like IPCC comes up with about 2 to 3% of global emissions. Well, in our state, you know, in our biggest county with the most drivers, the most fuel use and all of that, we're at 25%. So, and I've seen out of Europe that there's about 20% really in aviation impact for global warming. And I'm only talking about CO2. I'm not talking about nitrous oxides or methane or sulfur or, you know, water vapor.
And Debbie, have there been US-wide studies done on this at all?
There's nobody else doing this.
Right, so this is only study.
Yeah, and it's because of my background that I got into this on emissions. Otherwise, I wouldn't even, you know, I would be very confused by all of this because the industry does a good job of manipulating the whole narrative. And it's also come to Europe because you guys there are talking about biofuels. And we already know that's a non-starter.
Listen, can you all mute just? That's brilliant. Thank you. On you go, Debbie, and then I'll go to Elefthera. Yeah. Okay, Elefthera, I'll bring you in now.
Thank you, John. Thank you, ladies, for your presentations. I just wanted to say that things are a little bit different from what it looks. Alice talked to us about technology innovation and about biofuels and about things that is known, most of the people know because they hear it from news or from other sources that are on site. But the reality is what Debbie presented, that it is very different, because technology innovation is in reality very low, and the changes are very slow and insignificant.
Yes.
So we have to raise awareness about that, and we have to inform people, and we need as many people as we can to do that, because that's how we will tackle aviation.
And can I just follow on from that point, Eleftheria? And really, this is a question for yourself, but also for Alice. Alice, you explained how the climate ambassadors are working and are really working quite effectively. Do you think the new, so everybody knows, the European Union had elections in June. Do you think the new setup in Europe will enable you to continue the work of the climate ambassadors, or will things change?
No, definitely. There is a will to empower Climate Pact ambassadors and to support them in the coming years as well. And definitely the EU Climate Pact is not an initiative that came with an expiration date.
Right.
So the Climate Pact is here. It will be there for the coming years, as long as we have people that they are interested in taking the lead and promote local actions. So I think that, yes, this is something that will not stop, but definitely what Eleftheria just said and what I said in my presentation, all these things that we're discussing today, they are not known to the majority of people. So it's an opportunity to raise awareness also about this issue to citizens and to everyone that is traveling, to be more aware. And if I may, I want to ask a question, Debbie, if I may.
Yeah, far away, yes.
Thank you. Debbie, thank you for your presentation. As I said in the beginning, I'm not an aviation expert, and I really enjoyed all of your data and what you presented. Actually, I have two questions, comments. You said that the industry is actually not listening, and they are trying to manipulate somehow all these actions, but is this also, but I think that this is the case for all industries. They are not listening. They want to do what they want because it's about their profit, mainly about their profit and everything. So,
Right.
I understand what you say, but it's a matter of all industries that they are not listening to organizations, people, and everyone. It was just a comment from what I see in my everyday life. And the second one about the biofuels. In your presentation, you said that it's a partial solution. But in our case, and in all cases, since there is slow development, is a partial solution much better than no solution? And this is the question.
Yeah, and this is goes back to a philosophical question for me. Is a non-solution a solution? It doesn't work. It's not realistic. It's not sustainable. The different types of fuel that they've looked at to be able to deliver to an airport, all of these are very logistically complicated, the supply chain, the demand for it, because there's so much fuel being used. I mean, 19 billion gallons of Jet A fuel. You know, and Europe has said it would take half of your feedstock, half of your agricultural land to be able to supply aviation. Aviation is a beast that's guzzling fuel like nothing else, and it's extremely energy intensive. It's the most energy intensive form of transportation in the world. So biofuel manufacture and delivery is very complicated, very expensive. Biofuel costs more. It takes away feedstock. It is not, they haven't offered a real firm solution. Is it going to be corn? Is it going to be wood waste? Is it going to be synthetic blends? And FAA is very slow to approve these going through an engine because there's safety issues involved. And the sustainability of any of those for how long is unsure. and unclear. The only reduction you have at all, Alice, is in the manufacture and delivery. There's nothing at the tailpipe. So as you continue to increase Jet A fuel use and use biofuels as a blend, they will completely overtake any improvements quickly because of growth in the industry. And that's why I put in those slides about growth, because demand and growth are not realistic as well. They're also being overplayed for industry profits.
Okay, thank you.
Boeing and Airbus all
Sorry,
want
Debbie.
to make more planes.
Right, thank you for that, Debbie. Richard, you want to come in?
Yes, this is a question for Alice, really. On one of your slides, you mentioned a recognised number, which is the aircraft industry is contributing 2 to 3% of the carbon emissions.
Yeah.
And yet Debbie is saying it's probably closer to 20, I believe, if I'm not misunderstanding that. Do you recognise the 20%, or is that a new number to you?
I will say again what I said in the beginning. I'm not an aviation expert, and because of today's presentation, I did some research, and this is the number that I found through my research. I'm here mainly to speak about the EU Climate Pact, and because of this presentation, I tried to connect also the EU Climate Pact with the aviation impacts. So I'm not in a position to answer.
Okay, fine. That's great. I mean, Bob, whenever I quote numbers all the time. I mean, that's what I do regarding aviation usage and noise. And as soon as you put a number up, people just simply say from the industry, we don't recognise that number, and it's kicked into the long grass. And I think if Debbie's number is nearer the truth, and we're kind of people like myself who've, have got a bit of a community. People use my service to work out what the noise is and possible pollution by aircraft overflying their postcodes. I'd like, obviously, to get people's attention, and we really need to get people's attention if the number is closer to the 20% over our communities, as opposed to the 2% or 3%, which is being quoted by the aviation industry or by the climate scientists even. Now, I think we really need to nail this, and somehow, how do we nail it?
Yeah, Richard, let me say.
Yes.
So 350.org in our region also contributed to this task force. And I will say they're talking about the same thing we are, that the only way to reduce the impact, if you have to decarbonize aviation by 95%, and we're talking about 95 billion gallons of Jet A fuel globally, that's huge. The only way it can be accomplished is to reduce flying, to reduce the number of planes. And I can see that in my chart that I put on gallons used. The only time in history SeaTac Airport's climate impact has gone down was during the pandemic, when flying was affected by 80%. This 80% less. So I'm saying, in our county, in our large county, with the number of people that we have in our state, which is the biggest county in contributing to climate impact, with the airports there at 25%, a quarter of it, geographically, definitely, your airport, like John's at Heathrow, is pretty similar in operations. You've got the same climate impact.
Yes, I think this may be the thing, because it's a good point you're raising here, Richard. I think the accepted figure by the industry and by many governments is the figure that Alice used, about 2 to 3%.
Yes, yes, that's true.
I think it may, that may be a slight underestimate, because it excludes non-CO2 emissions, but that's the figure that's generally used. But I think Debbie probably hit the point you've made just now, is that in a particular geographical area, where the airport is very dominant, then the proportion of CO2 is liable to be higher. So I think that's the slight difference between between the two figures, because
But you have the other thing that's going on in this same time frame, John, is cars are going down because they're more electric.
yes,
Industry is going down because they're being forced by policy and regulation. Aviation is continuing to climb at an exponential rate that is much greater than any of these other sectors. So I don't know what the exact figure would be. I pose that as a possible, but I know that industry uses those 4 different tools at least to hide the impact. And that's what's getting reported out from government. So that 2 to 3% is probably wrong. I'm guessing it's probably wrong just because of the way it's reported in the models, the way it's reported at the airport level, and so forth.
yes, I don't know if we can say for sure it's wrong, but certainly at certain areas it's probably it's probably higher. Duncan, I don't know whether you were signaling you agree with everything, or was that a thumbs up or a hand up? It was a thumbs up. Everyone's happy then, Duncan. Everyone loves you. Okay, if Eliana could just mute yourself, that would be just great. I know I set a bad example at the beginning by not muting myself, but if you could do so, that would be just wonderful. Arlene, your hand is up. Welcome.
Thank you. Let me tell you what study I thought could be done. I worked on, can you hear me?
Let me just
I think it's Richard. Is it Richard?
No, I think it's Eliana from Campino Airport. If you could mute yourself, that would be great. Or don't talk.
Okay, you know I care about
Okay,
data.
on you go. On you go.
May I speak?
Yes, on you go, Arlene.
Thank you. This is one study I did in the New York City area, but I think it should be done elsewhere. If you look in New York City, there are flights that go to Washington, there are flights that go to Boston, but there are also trains. Amtrak goes to Boston. Amtrak goes to Washington. I remember years ago, many years ago, I would take a short flight to Washington or Boston. I do it only by train now. And many people have switched and gone short distances by train. I go to Philadelphia by train. My grandson's at Drexel University. He takes the train in, and in an hour and 10 minutes, he's in New York City. So here's what I wondered. Anyone ever do an analysis of whether the train to the particular cities that people are using planes to can in some way be used more frequently, and there should be a greater emphasis?
Yeah.
Now I see no Amtrak this up. I know there's been problems with Amtrak. Put that aside for now. Has there been an analysis of cities that are offering rapid transit, and hopefully Amtrak would do better? Did we ever do such an analysis? And also to promote that for short trips, people should consider the alternative, as I do for Philadelphia, Boston, and Washington. And that could be done across the United States. I know I'm more familiar with those cities. But that, and then we, as concerned about the health impacts of pollution, both air and noise, promote this kind of concept. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, just before I come to you, Armel, I'll just try and answer Arlene's question. There have been studies done, certainly in Europe, about air and rail, comparing time, comparing emissions, and one or two other comparisons. Greenpeace has done some work, and also T&E, Transport and Environment, have done a fairly major report. So the work has been done in Europe. I suspect it hasn't been done in the States, but it has been done in Europe. And the other thing is, in Europe, the European Union is is putting a lot of money into high-speed rail. You know,
Yes, more than we are. Yeah.
That's right. They are keen to encourage just exactly the sort of switch you talked about, Arlene, and as I think it was Alice said, you know, the emissions from rail, even from high-speed rail, are much less than they are from planes.
Is there a report that you could share with particularly?
I will. Yes, I'll get hold of it. I haven't got it to hand right now, Arlene.
And then we can give it to public officials. We have some very good people.
So just let me say, on our task force, I analyzed, you know, the rail versus the flight from Seattle to Portland.
Okay.
So the flight, Alaska offers it for about $68. You could do it on Amtrak for about $29. It takes 3 hours to get from SeaTac to Portland. It's about, what is it, Dave? 300 miles to Portland? 350? Oh, 150 miles. You can do it on Acela in an hour, Arlene.
That's what I'm saying.
Miles an hour. It's less time. By the time you go to the airport and get on the plane, you're 2 hours with your trip. The train right now, though, at 80 miles an hour is 3 hours. So you've got an extra hour.
Right.
And you've got less cost. And the emissions are, you know, many times lower per passenger mile. So I wanted to explain too that emissions are calculated per passenger mile. So you put in certain number of people onto a plane, you've got this footprint, certain number of people on a train, you've got this footprint. Aviation is at least 10 times more energy intensive per passenger mile. So
you've been promoted. In other words, I think we need to promote this more.
Well, yes, we
saying. That
absolutely.
Is
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that comes from us.
Yeah. On the transportation, as an elected on a transportation committee, we didn't even include rail in our discussion group. And I had to work pretty hard to get them even to include aviation. They are just talking about cars, trucks, buses on the road. And that's where the legislation goes to, Arlene, to get you out of your car. Meanwhile, the airport can continue.
Okay, well, let's move on, if we will, because
thank you.
Yes, okay, because Armel has been waiting very patiently indeed. So it's all yours, Armel.
Hi, thank you. I think you all know me. My name is Armel. I live next to Heathrow Airport. I've known John for probably 30 years or more. The discussion between the two American ladies was fascinating. We have just had an election and we have now a Labour government. Now, under the previous government, we were supposed to have a high-speed rail called HS2 that was supposed to go from Euston in the center of London, hopefully all the way to Scotland. And instead of starting in Scotland, it actually started in London. And now it's not even in London, it is in West London, because it probably won't ever go to Euston. So it's on the outside of London, and it's going to stop at Birmingham. Now, it was supposed to be Birmingham, Manchester, and then the north.
Just to explain, Armel, that Birmingham is in the centre of England rather than the north of England, far less Scotland.
Yeah. So yesterday, the new government announced that because HS2 has been cancelled north of Birmingham, they are now asking people not to travel by train or to actually stagger their times because there will be overcapacity, which is exactly the opposite to what we all want, which is putting people on trains and then stop people flying. So I'm not sure whether John has actually heard that, but that came in yesterday under this new government who want to be very friendly. Oh, and by the way, they have a chancellor of the exchequer who is actually all for the third runway at Heathrow Airport. So yeah, so much for climate change, you know, and their green credential. But I mean, it was interesting to hear you two, you know, Debbie and Darlene, because in our case, we've not just been told, don't go between Manchester and Birmingham because there won't be enough train, there will be too much capacity. Now, what we should do is actually have a levy on the airline and on the passengers, the polluter pays, and that levy should actually be used to actually improve the rails and to have a subsidy and put people on trains. So just wanted to make.
Arlene, Armel, thank you very much indeed for that. And I think what's coming, one of the themes that's coming across is the potential of rail, high-speed rail. To finish on a slightly more positive note, some countries are doing it really rather well. Spain, Italy. Italy's got really good high-speed trains. They're affordable and they are very nice to travel in. So but you're right, Armel, that in some countries like the UK, it's going in the other direction. So we're up. Our hour is up. I want to thank Debbie and Alice really so much. I mean, they were contrasting presentations, but that's exactly what we wanted, because we wanted to hear different perspectives, different views, and they were hugely informative. We will take a break from webinars over the summer holidays, but I think I'm right in saying, Elefthera, Amtai, that we'll probably start up again in September.
Yes, we will have another ambassador here, Urania Konstanti, with a theme that it would be near ultrafine particles and what they do for health, for the health damage. And I think I want to thank these lovely two ladies for being here tonight. Sorry we didn't have so much people, but I think it's because of the holidays now, and we're a little bit late. And we hope to see you at the next webinar too.
But
and,
can I just say that there are probably a number of people from around the Heathrow Airport who are not there, because we had a meeting between 1:30, which finished at 20:05. So I had to rush it to be here, but other people probably couldn't attend. So apologies on their behalf.
And as we said, the webinar will go on YouTube, will go on our website, will go on social media, and we'll hopefully get it up by the end of the week. So I think that's.
I just wanted to say, John, look for that report on that 20% that I saw from Europe.
Okay, that's great.
If I can find it, I'll share it.
And I think that's it, Elefthera, isn't it?
Yes. So we want to. Do we want to say something from the chat?
No, I think we're okay. I think we're probably it's probably time. So just to thank everybody,
thank
and
you
as
all
yeah,
for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.